Okay. Hello, everyone, and good evening, and welcome to today's event. I'm Katja Stille, Chair of the Urban Design Group and Director at Tibbalds Planning Urban Design. Today, we will be exploring Manual for Streets and gather thoughts and opinions to inform the current review. As usual, we are keen to provide a voice to practitioners and draw lessons from our day-to-day practice. We have a packed evening ahead of us with 11 excellent speakers. Each of them will give us short presentations addressing issues from climate response, safety, and the practical application of the guidance. For many years, the UDG has been campaigning to update Manual for Streets too. Not because we disagree with its content. On the contrary, we were keen to draw attention to the good principles that are included within it. And above all, we thought it needed to be given teeth and status. We think Manual for Streets should become the highway manual to be used on all streets. And we hope that following this review, we can finally get rid of outdated and inappropriate guidance once and for all. So we welcome the current review and the positive first steps that have been taken. During a recent workshop led by WSP, I've been delighted to see that the review of Manual for Streets started with a consideration of the vision and objectives for any given project, and with a focus on place. Questions that need to be asked, like what kind of place we want to create and for whom and why. What do we want to achieve and what activities should happen within these streets? When we use these overarching questions to identify the project objectives and use them as an assessment framework throughout the design development, I think we have a real chance of delivering more positive streets, especially if these early considerations in every project take into account government strategies and targets, such as climate change, tackling obesity, and if they're backed up by technical details. The process of defining the vision and the outcome first, and then considering how we get there, is an approach that should become common to all planning, design, and engineering processes. If we all start from the same basis and set the same and similar objectives, we might finally start to align our processes so that we can all pull in the same direction and deliver the places that we want much more easily. However, tonight, first of all, we are focusing on Manual for Streets. And I'm really pleased to introduce our first speaker, Glenn Higgs, Technical Director at WSP and the lead for Manual for Streets review. So please, Glenn, over to you.
Thanks, Katja. And thanks for inviting me to say a few words to set the scene with Manual for Streets. It's great to see so many people at this event, and it's brilliant to see there's so much interest in the update. And I think from what I've heard so far, there are high expectations for what the guidance is going to be, which is great. So no pressure there for WSP, but we're looking forward to it. So if I just briefly start by saying why the document's being updated and what we're doing. So Manual for Streets 1 and 2 were produced around about 11 years and I think it's 14 years ago. So a fair while since they were published. And as we all know, lots has changed since then, and some pretty fundamental things, even over the last 5 years. You know, if we think about how the focus has shifted positively towards active travel and all the policy and guidance that has come out recently on that. Of course, what's happened over the last year has really made us think about, as individuals really, about what we value, particularly within our local areas. And whilst, you know, the behavior is changing a bit already back towards getting in our cars, I think a lot of the good behavior will remain and carry on. Particularly because a lot of us are going to be working from home more in the future. There are more choices in recent years in terms of travel. You know, on most streets, in many streets in London, you know, we have the option of taking a high bike or being part of soon e-scooter schemes. So all of this means we need to think about how our streets and places need to adapt to accommodate these modes. And of course, there's lots of other things that are high on the agenda, such as climate change and decarbonisation. I mean, that's changes, but the documents themselves were never as well used as intended. And there are different reasons for this, partly because of the status that the guidance have, particularly Manual for Streets 2. The new document will be guidance as the other ones were, so no changes there. The documents possibly weren't as easy to kind of navigate and use and find what you needed to find as they could have been. But as Katja said, there's lots of good stuff in there. So it's not a case of, starting again and ripping them up. It's using the best of what's there and adding to it and updating the documents. It's also worth mentioning, as you will be aware, there's lots going on in terms of guidance and policy changes, not least with the publication of National Model Design Codes recently and the ongoing planning policy reforms, and also the creation very soon of Active Travel England, which hopefully will be really important and constructive. So it's a good time to reposition and emphasize how Manual for Streets aligns with this guidance and policy. So that's why it's been updated. Well, what are we doing and what are we planning to do? So there's two documents at the moment, aren't they? So we're combining those documents. So it's a new document that's going to be replacing those. So it's not a third document. It's not a third in this. It's not a trilogy. So Manual for Streets 3, as it's been called, is kind of probably not the way to look at it. So it will have its own title, but hold on to your chairs, because the new document is highlighted to be called Manual for Streets. So very similar to the previous ones. So this is a document that will refer to existing streets and new development. So, of course, it has to appeal to a wide audience, which is going to be a challenge. And I think we have to acknowledge that it won't possibly do the same things to everyone or work as well for everyone, but hopefully we'll get as close to that as possible. There is certainly a plan for it to be, a really kind of forward, fresh-looking document, and it will have very much a people-centric approach as a golden thread running through it, and the importance of place, will be emphasised more than it was previously. And as Katja mentioned, we held some workshops last week, which were really well attended, and one of the things that we introduced there was the focus on an outcomes-based approach. And what this does is it recognises some of those changes that I mentioned, some of the things that are more important or have come to the fore more so than previously in recent years. We wouldn't have mentioned a few years ago outcomes about, places being more sociable and more equitable, possibly. And there's some of the outcomes that we've identified. So it's really broadening out some of the considerations we would have previously given to streets and places. We've identified 10 outcomes so far. And what they also do is it provides a focus for discussion particularly between different disciplines, often kind of with occasionally, often conflicting views. So it's, it provides a kind of frame for those discussions to agree what streets and places should be and what should achieve. So we're about 3 months into the project. And over the next month, maybe a month's time, we'll kind of start putting pen to paper, as it were. So we're in the kind of development stage now. The intention is to publish it early next year. We're getting input along the way, regular stages from a project board, and that's quite extensive. There's about a dozen people on that from different sectors. We're also getting input from a wide stakeholder group, and the workshops last week were the kind of first stage in that. So it's great to see events like this as well. And I know others have been held just on Manual for Streets. Because it's good to highlight, what people think and how the document should deal with, certain aspects, and how the document needs to evolve over the next, 10 months or so. So so that's it really. I'm really looking forward to the discussion and to hear the presentations, and looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn, for giving us an overview of your scope and timescale. and the new title of the document. Yeah, Robert Huxford, our own UDG director, will give us an overview of the legal framework in which we're working.
Hello. Well, that's my introduction for me. Moving straight on. Three types of law: common law made by judges, acts that are made by Parliament, and regulations that are made by ministers under powers given to them by Parliament. The legal landscape looks complicated, and in fact, it's even more complicated than that. But I just take a screen print if you want to look at this later. Some of the principal bits of legislation there: the Highways Act, the Road Traffic Act, the Equality Act, hugely important. And over there on the right-hand side, the common law, some of the key precedents that inform how highway law and also how the rights of the public to use the highway are based. The two work together. For example, the Road Traffic Act 1988, the Section 39 duty to promote road safety is the basis of the duty of care in the case of Aitken versus Newham. The highway authorities owe a duty of care to both careful and negligent road users. Conversely, common law sometimes informs what the primary legislation means. So the public sector equality duty is informed by the case of Ali versus Newham, which explains what, it rehearses what the meaning of due regard is. There is a right to use the public highway in common law for movement, to pass and repass. There is also a right to use the public highway for any reasonable purpose that does not amount to a public or private nuisance. So there's a right for movement and there's a right to place. And this is a hugely important concept and must be reflected in any guidance that gets produced and any decisions that are made. The decisions need to reflect wider statutory duties as well, the wider statutory duties that are placed on local authorities and the policies that are developed by central government, from climate change through to, say, the network management duty. The network management duty is not an exclusive duty. The local authority has not exclusively under a duty to promote the expeditious movement of traffic. It says expressly in that duty that it is there to be considered alongside all of the other duties that Parliament has placed on local authorities. So, making decisions in street design, they need to be robust and reasonable. And a good starting point is the Wednesbury case, the basis for judicial review. So they're looking for things to be taken into account that should be taken into account, that things shouldn't be taken into account, that shouldn't be taken into account. It all seems slightly obvious, but this is absolutely fundamental. And it requires that decisions should be reasonable. There's a definition in the common law of due regard. It means a substantial and vigorous and open-minded approach to making decisions. It's not a tick box exercise. It's not an exercise in justifying a decision that's already been made. There's also common law precedents on the legal significance of statutory guidance. It's about local authorities being required to follow the guidance with liberty to deviate from it where there is good reason to do so, but without freedom to take a substantially different course. The decisions should be based on robust science and evidence. And here's a scheme for rating evidence that's drawn from the medical profession. The basis for street design in the second part of the 20th century was very much centered on vehicles. And there you have publications from 1946 and 1966. It was about stopping sight distances, tracking, dimensions, speeds. Manual for Streets changed all that. It put people at the top of a user hierarchy. And since then, we've had the Equality Act, which now enshrines this in law. It's not just guidance. This is a formal legal requirement. There's a requirement to take into consideration, to have due regard to the need to promote equality of opportunity in relation to protected characteristics such as age, gender, disability. This means that we should be considering the different walking and cycling speeds. A blind person may walk at 1 mile an hour or less, an elderly person similarly. This means that crossing a street is a long and protracted experience where they're exposed to danger from oncoming traffic. The consequences of different impact speeds and injury risk should be taken into consideration. The ability of children to judge the speed and distance of oncoming traffic. They have major difficulties in judging the speed of oncoming traffic, traveling them more than about 20 miles an hour. There is income and wealth. Not all of members of society are able to afford to run a car, and the Equality Act requires that to be considered. There is a due regard to consider those issues. And then we have this duty of care owed to both careful and negligent road users. These things must be taken into consideration when settling on decisions on street design. And a practical example, there are local authorities, even at this moment, who are requiring that the size of refuse collection vehicles be taken into consideration when deciding on street design. The Equality Act applies to all local authority services, and that includes the waste collection service, and it includes the contractors who are employed by a local authority to collect waste. So we have a situation where ostensibly the waste collection service is determining the design of streets. This is wholly wrong and wholly incompatible with the duty under the Equality Act and also the common law duty of care. It's people, the needs of people, that should be determining street design, and the specification of waste collection vehicles should reflect the dimensions and geometry of streets that are designed to suit people, and not the other way around. There is no duty in law to accommodate 32-ton, 4-axle waste collection vehicles. So, in conclusion, last slides, there was a manual for Victorian streets of sorts, and it's in the model bylaws. The model bylaws were, in effect, a manual for towns, covering building regulations, public health, and a wide range of things, all integrated into one package. So it's one page, and it led to streets that look like this, but it could be something a lot more varied. Maybe a fifth of the streets in the United Kingdom are based on this guidance, and it was enshrined in law. It was a requirement in law. How to turn manual for streets into statutory guidance? It just takes this simple amendment of 2 lines to the Highways Act. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for listening. You're entitled to look up and understand the law. I've included references in the early presentation. I hope this wasn't too confusing, and the very best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Now we come to our next speaker, which is Jeremy Leach. He is kind of chair of the London Living Streets, and he will talk to us about the Vision Zero campaign to reduce serious and fatal traffic incidents.
Thanks so much, Katja. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. I'm going to speak about the potential of Vision Zero to inform the manual for streets. And I think that, you know, we obviously, just to recap, Vision Zero is a longer term vision for zero fatal and serious injuries on our roads. And we believe this should be at the heart of a revised manual for streets. And the key elements that we campaign on, and we feel that there's strong research to back up these, are slower speeds, safe street design, and particular focus on junctions and crossings, safe space for cycling, safe vehicles, less traffic, and safe behaviours and enforcement. And because it relates to street design, we're going to look at this evening very quickly at slower speeds, safe street design, and safe space for cycling. So I think the relationship and the impact of vehicle speed on pedestrians dying or being seriously injured in a collision is well established. Here's a chart in relation to fatality. Obviously, it's much higher in terms of the risk of a serious injury. And we feel that slower speeds have to be the building blocks of fairer towns, cities and village. And this was mentioned at, certainly in more than passing in the previous manual for streets. I'm sorry, a lot of the examples here are from London and the images from London this evening. I just haven't been able to get around other places latterly to take images. But TfL estimates that although speed is a factor in all casualties, but in around 37% of collisions on London's roads, speed is a factor where someone is seriously injured. We know from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine research that reducing maximum speeds in built-up areas to 20 miles an hour is associated with a more than 2/5 reductions in casualties. So there are really strong arguments for a default 20-mile-an-hour speed limit in built-up areas, with the added bonuses of more walking and cycling, and lower air and noise pollution. Safe space for cycling. A key element is the importance of protected cycle lanes on main roads. While cycling made up only 1% of the total vehicle mileage in Great Britain in 2019, people cycling made up almost 14% of all serious and fatal casualties. 75%, 74%, almost 3/4 of cycling serious and fatal casualties occur in urban areas. There's a good body of research to indicate how effective protected cycle infrastructure is in reducing risk of injury. And here's an example of the data from Copenhagen. Thirdly, in terms of safe street design, for pedestrians in particular, casualties occur in areas, in particular, in places where people and vehicles mix. So here's an example from Bristol. And what we can see here is that the city centre, there's lots of interaction between people and vehicles there, high levels of casualties, but in particular, these linear high streets, those places, the local centres where people shop. And it's really important that those become places which are designed to be far more safe for people on foot, but also more appealing to attract people walking and cycling. And this is a more local example to me, the Old Kent Road. You could see in this core high street area, the number of casualties of almost is incredibly intense. This is just 3 years. The last 3 full years of casualties in that section. And this is just, this is not to pick on any one particular, example of the Red Route network, but you can see the characteristics of this: a lack of crossing facilities, higher speeds in free-flowing traffic, space allocation between people and vehicles is clearly weighted towards vehicles, little emphasis on the role of the high street, no provision for people cycling. And then when you do get to the provision for people on foot, people walking, that's the quality of the environment that there is for them, which is extremely low. Another area that's really important is around junctions and crossings. More than 2/3 of deaths and serious injuries to pedestrian, cycling and motorcyclists occur at junctions. People are at the greatest risk when their crossing provisions are non-existent, poor, when they've got to wait too long to cross, or there's too little time given them to cross. And this is a wonderful welcome to London. This is as you leave London Euston Station, you want to cross south towards central London. There is no green man crossing at the western arm of that junction. And finally, talking about neighbourhood streets. Again, really important that we focus on this, and that's why there's been so much focus on this in the last year or so. Traffic volumes have increased enormously on unclassified roads in Great Britain since 2009. Almost 3/4 increase in the last 10 years in London, driven by the advent of sat-nav technology, the rise of Uber, online deliveries. And again, the research shows that where low traffic neighbourhoods are introduced, there's a huge drop in injuries inside those low traffic neighbourhoods. And this research, the references come in a second, shows that there was no adverse impact on the surrounding main roads. So just really trying to put the case for a Vision Zero embedded in Manual for Streets, and the opportunities that there are if safe street design is put at the heart of all the work that's about to happen with Manual for Streets. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Jeremy. Now our next speaker is Grant Smith. He's a design consultant, and I think most of you will know him, and he will talk about boulevards, main streets, densities. Over to you, Graham.
Right, I'll start. This kind of road, Robert did a very brief history, but this kind of road is a typical road width throughout the country. It's not mentioned in Local Transport Note 120. It shouldn't exist. And Manual for Streets, previous versions have avoided it. It's too big, too difficult an issue. But my proposition to you, and my hope, and what I want to happen for the next Manual for Streets, is that we seriously address the issue of this kind of road. How will we deal with it? How will you make it safe for cycling? I could probably do it on Sunday morning with a group of 20 other people dressed in bright colours. But to go to school or even to go to work, it's extremely dangerous. So neither of these are main streets, but how do you deal with providing for cycling on a main street where presumably or let's say there isn't space to build a safe cycling facility on the side. A German example on the left, it's hardly a massive, you won't find this all over Germany. And on the right-hand side, an example from the Netherlands, just north of Amsterdam. The diversion on the right took what was already a narrow road with effectively a kind of ribbon development along it all the way to Purmerend, north of Amsterdam. And they tried a few years ago to make this wider cycle lane provision on both sides, but it was very straight. And the situation that you see in front of you now is one where they've consciously narrowed the road. They put parking places further into the road to force the road to narrow, to bring to drivers the unmistakable fact that the road is narrow. Will Manual for Streets deal with narrow roads and making cycling safer? It's easy to talk about bicycle streets. This is an example from Utrecht that's taken 20 years to develop. It was the first cycle street in the Netherlands. It had a raised median. It was regarded as dreadful by cyclists because it was a raised median. They felt that motorists were hunting them. After 20 years, after the recent 5 years of negotiations, they're now going to make it so that it looks like a fietsstraat. I'm not entirely sure whether a fietsstraat is a legal entity in the Netherlands, but if we have narrow roads in towns where there's a possibility of a reasonable amount of cycle traffic, how are you going to achieve it? One of the lessons that I hope we'll take on board in Manual for Streets is to have a designation of this kind of street where it is not legal to overtake a cyclist. Now I'd like to say a few words about busy streets. So the top image, these are images from Stephen Marshall's study on arterial roads of a few years ago. So the top study is a main street, let's say in an urban area like the middle of London or anywhere in London where the main road is a spine of the district. I live in Oxford, and surrounding Oxford, there are expansions going on all over the place where there's either a main road like the A40 at Aitken, which is being built on the other side and to the west of Aitken. And around Oxford, we've got places where we need expansions on the outside of DB32 estates. There's no guidance on how to build onto a DB32 estate. There's no guidance on how to build across a main road. The bottom illustration here is one where the road becomes a seam between two districts. I've spent some hours this afternoon even talking with engineers on the A40 project in Oxfordshire. And they're completely terrified of the notion of the street, of the A40, not a trunk road, becoming a spine, becoming a junction between these two places. I think Manual for Streets should address this issue. Here's an example of what's being talked about. You notice the little yellow-red arrows making it look as if there's massive amounts of connectivity between the existing and these proposed new places. But only one of those yellow-red arrows is a grade-separated junction. The other ones are more or less take your life in your hands. And if you look on the right-hand side, where there's a large roundabout, the engineers have so far provided east-west connectivity, but not north-south connectivity. This is too narrow a view of the way that major roads should be dealt with. When it comes to boulevard situation, this is from Easterenlaan on the eastern side of Amsterdam by the island development. And this is effectively a new road with a single lane dual carriageway on each side, a somewhat park-like space in the center of the road, parking in the center of the road, and a completely straight on cycle lane. You'll notice the bollards in the middle of the image. This is a side junction. So there's no concern or over concern here about the safety of drivers turning in or drivers turning out. They are made in front of them to see that the cycle lane and the footpath carry straight on. I think this is something that really should be emphasized in the new manual for streets. It isn't that it wasn't there in the past, but it needs to be made much firmer, I would say. And finally, we had some comments from Jeremy Leach about speeds and accidents. This is 2 images from a town in, or city in Switzerland, near to Bern, called Grenchen. And here they've introduced a Begegnungszone, a meeting zone, where the speed limit is 20 kilometers an hour. I think it isn't until you reach about 14 miles an hour that people can cross a road without feeling that they're taking their lives in their hand. So to conclude, I proposed a few new changes in the law, but I think they're necessary. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot, Graham. And thank you for sharing the examples from the Netherlands and also Germany, because I think there's a lot we can learn from other countries as well. So now we go back to Stefan, and the presentation works. So over to you, Stefan.
Perfect, thank you. Take 2 then. Sorry about that. I think my broadband went wobbly. I should maybe say that before the event, we all got together and I even tried my presentation and it worked. So apologies about that. So yes, I'm going to start again. So my presentation is about imperfect pieces. And I was inspired to write this on the back of one of the previous UDG events, where there was a lot of discussion in the chat bar about, well, how do we fix house building in this country? How do we create better places? And there was lots of discussions about abolishing volume house builders in this country. Maybe it's one solution, but I don't think it's ever going to happen. So in the meantime, what do we do with our imperfect pieces? And I'm reminded of work by Sue McGlynn and Paul Moraine, where they explored that, you know, through a powergram, the lack of power that urban designers actually have within the system. We can only influence people by encouraging them, inspiring them, trying to show them different ways of doing things. But that work from 1993 remains. So we've got to bear that in mind when we think about propositions and ideas for change. The government is now getting very invested in design, which is a great thing to see. We've got National Model Design Code, National Design Guide, the proposals for, I guess it's a revival of CABE through the Office of Place. And this is all very good and welcome. But what about the various elephants in the room? We've got issues with highways authorities. We've got issues with resources, which are sometimes interlinked with why highways authorities are perhaps adopting some of the decisions they do make. And we know we've got big issues in terms of regional investment, particularly in terms of where areas of housing growth are going and investment in public transport infrastructure. The investment from central government is simply not forthcoming. We've seen lots of examples about how to do things, but this is actually more common than it should be across the country. And this is 10 years on, despite having manual for streets. So out in the regions, this is much more commonplace than stuff like this, sadly. So, you know, we talk about manual for streets 3. I don't think in many places we're doing manual for streets 1. Housing developments that create an urban environment that look like this. This is more common than that. We don't see that very much. Street environments like this, again by the same developer, make more profit and get through the planning system as fast as things like this. And John Cowcutt must have been, 15 years ago in the Cowcutt Review, talked about fast-tracking planning for schemes of a high design quality. So we seem to be wrestling with the same issues 15, 20 years on. A lot of the housing typologies or housing types that are associated with urbanism are the things people are fleeing from. So the things we promote are not really the things that people want. So we know people are fleeing from apartments. They want outdoor amenity space. So we're seeing people fleeing to more suburban, lower density forms of development. And lots of the house builders are reporting a surge in demand for detached products, as they would call it. I talked at the sort of start of the presentation about the lack of investment in public transport infrastructure. And I wanted to show a scheme from a district I used to work in Leicestershire. So this is one of Leicestershire's largest SUEs, a sustainable urban extension, it's known as. So you can see the red line there, about 5,000 homes going there with a couple of schools thrown in. And it straddles the Leicester to Burton line that carries freight now and refurbished tube trains down to the capital. But the line was closed to passenger traffic in the 60s. Now, the original plan when this was allocated was the line would be reopened on the back of government investment, and that investment has never been forthcoming. So the opportunity to create a guided busway or equivalent between 4,000 new homes in Leicester city centre has been lost. A trip that could have taken 12 minutes on a guided bus at 50 miles an hour, sorry, there should be another slide there, takes much longer. The developer wanted to put a protected cycleway network in on that development, but the Highways Authority didn't see it as being necessary to the safe and effective functioning of the highway, so insisted its complete removal. Because you don't have that guided busway and because you don't have a protected cycleway, this is what's happened. So the trip into Leicester, the only way to do it is 45 minutes in a car. You know, obviously things have changed in COVID, but, you know, we all know that there might be some element of returning back to the city, returning back to the office. The school run looks like this. You know, the street infrastructure is not welcoming, safe, or gives parents the confidence to allow their kids to cycle to school. So to conclude, just some 6 thoughts. Do we as the urban design group need to be more pragmatic than purists? Can we sustain arguments that the only way to improve volume house building is by breaking up volume house builders? Will codes really help under-resourced and that's too under-resourced. Maybe I'm stressing the point there. So very under-resourced local planning authorities. Maybe codes will be outsourced. They'll be obviously expensive, but will they be practical for day-to-day development management use? How can we break the cycle when actually there are examples where we ourselves are actually fueling some of the worst we see? How can we improve this where the bulk of housing delivery is in car-dependent locations? And I'm almost pleased in hindsight I went after Robert because Robert was calling for an update to the Highways Act. Maybe it should be the Street and Highways Act. Maybe we need an annual campaign where each year we focus on a key thing we want to achieve. And I've offered some suggestions of what we might do in 2022 and 2023. Thank you for my second attempt at this presentation.
Thanks a lot, Stefan. And thank you for drawing our attention to some more of the strategic issues that will remain despite the review of Manual for Streets and need to be tackled in the future or at the same time. So now we are going to Julie Futcher, architect, researcher, consultant, and she will talk about climate responsive streets.
So I'm going to read this. I don't normally, but as I've got such a short window, and I've got always so much to say, here goes. So my name is Julie Futcher. I'm an architect, but since 2007, I've been working with urban climatologists. Our work is focused on linking the outdoors and indoor climates and the critical need to embed urban climate knowledge into built environment practice to support climate responsive urbanism. But before I go on, I would like to draw your attention to our next free urban climate walk, the first one for a year, where we will go in more, we will cover in more detail the research that we've been doing. Okay, so what do we mean by climate responsive urbanism? Climate responsive urbanism recognises that components of urban systems are both highly integrated and interdependent, and importantly includes the urban commons and the use, preservation and access to our collective shared resources, e.g. daylight, ventilation, air quality, etc. Key components of comfortable, healthy environments and critical elements to encourage more sustainable urban practice, such as walking. However, frequently buildings are treated as standalone entities, as energy islands, where with some notable exceptions, responsibility ends at the building envelope, and the planning challenge of how to achieve good quality ambient conditions for both public space and the surrounding buildings is not fully resolved. In part, these oversights are a consequence of urban climate research being fragmented in its approach, drawing upon several different disciplines, each focusing on different spatial and timescales, often using different terminology to describe the relevant features, processes, and outcomes. As a result, urban climate knowledge is often misunderstood, underestimated, and misrepresented in much of the non-urban climate literature. For example, the well-known urban heat island phenomena is frequently misunderstood in terms of type, surface or air, timing, daytime or nighttime, and cause, natural energy exchange or anthropogenic. This is a diagram of London's average summer urban heat island and represents the nocturnal canopy layer air temperature UHI, which, as you can see, has a level of dependency upon the underlying setting. For example, you can see Richmond Park here, Hyde Park, and the City of London. When we look at this map of building height and openness to sky, we can clearly see that the urban land cover increases in density as we move into the city centre, reflecting the urban heat island. To address this, urban land cover is categorised into a series of local climate zones based on their approximate ability to modify local surface climates due to their fabric, land cover, structure, and metabolism. However, even within these local climate zones, intra-urban climate differences can be found, where one side of the street can differ to the next, or be more shady or sunlit, sheltered, gusty, have good or poor air quality, and so on. Scale is important, and at the intra-urban scale, the climate differences can be significant and directly impact on both building performance and the conditions of the surrounding area. To explore the significance of these net effects, energy effects, we have developed a series of proof of concept research activities based around the City of London. These activities include an urban climate walk, where we walk through, you can just about make out the route here along this pink dashed line. We walk through the city using our bodies as thermometers to identify what's going on as we walk through. What is it? What are the impacts of all of these buildings, both the lower rise ones as well as the high rise ones, on our experiences, on our levels of comfort? This is a section we can see how dramatic this is, how these large scale buildings have been inserted into a rather low-lying area. Now, the question is this good or bad? We don't know. If we removed this group of buildings here and turned it into a park, what would the net effect be? We don't understand enough about how these buildings interact with each other to be able to make good decisions about how we develop our cities over the coming years. And this has been made even more critical with COVID. Okay, so slide 11. So our research includes a network of sensors, a network of urban climate measurements, and a network of air quality measurements along around 80 positions through the city, identified by these yellow dots on this red line. As before, the city landscape is completely different depending on where and which part of the city you're in. But what we're exploring is how built form influences what's going on at street level. We're not researching what's going on inside the buildings, although we have simulated that to try and understand these interdependencies and those relationships. We know it's a pretty obvious one that tall buildings are going to impact on our levels of shading. But if you already have a very dense landscape during the winter, the tall buildings aren't necessarily having a bigger impact on what's going on down at street level. It's the density of these areas that are impacting there. The openness to sky, or the lack of openness to sky, which is impacting on levels of daylight. The taller buildings, the shadows will pass over quickly. I'm not saying that tall buildings are good. I'm not saying that tall buildings are good for the environment. I'm saying that we don't understand enough about their wider implications, their far-reaching effects. What we're saying is that at the moment we measure buildings' performance that ends at the building envelope, and actually the building envelope the boundary of the building actually extends into the wider environment. We've taken air temperature readings, air quality readings, wind, maximum and average. And we have found some very surprising results. This is reports on our air quality, and what we find when we get to the city, when we get to the eastern cluster, the air quality is actually really good. So there we are, right in the city of London, right in the very heart, the very centre of it, we have really good air quality. Would we get that good air quality if we were in a park? But that air quality, that good air quality comes with a penalty, because the air, the wind that comes off of those tall buildings is quite high and makes those that area quite difficult to live in. So what might be good for a block of buildings which has a daytime function, such as office work, might be completely different to a building group that might be used for residential purposes, where you might have good air quality, but at the cost of very windy conditions. Okay, our results have been verified using CFD modelling. And this is becoming increasingly important. This is last year's figures on buildings that would be 20 stories or higher. We can see there that we have quite a lot of tall buildings in the pipeline. What does that mean for our cities? So as you can see, our next urban climate walk is due on the 8th of March. But just to finish, understanding how cities receive, store and release heat has never been so critical. With increasing global air temperatures, cities such as London are 2 to 3 times more likely to exceed 35 degrees than their non-urban areas, which in turn will impact significantly on energy use, thermal comfort and health and well-being. Excessive warming can be managed at all scales through considered urban planning strategies. Obvious examples include those related to green vegetation and green infrastructure. However, critically, at the neighbourhood scale, built form is found to be the dominant factor in modifying radiation and ventilation exchanges at the urban surface. If properly understood, our built environments can be optimised to create effective, efficient, comfortable and healthy streets. Both climate change and COVID have raised questions about the suitability of high density development, not necessarily tall buildings, high density. Tall buildings don't necessarily mean high density. High density development, bringing into stark relief the vital importance of gardens and access to green space for health and well-being. The same gardens and green space that are needed for climate responsive urbanism. That's my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julie. And thanks for kind of drawing the attention to the kind of environment of our streets. The more we think about them as places, the more important those considerations will be. So now the next speaker is Colin Davis, architect and public realm consultant, and he will talk about putting manual for streets to practical use. Over to you, Colin.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I hope you can all hear me. And also, I hope you can now see my slides. If you like to nod, if you can see the slides, brilliant, absolutely fantastic. Okay, I'm going to talk about how we use the DMRB, so how we use the manual for streets, because the DMRB, bless it, is always there, and it trumps manual for streets many, many times, as has already been described this evening. So what does the DMRB have that the manual for streets does not have? It has language, and there are rules and there are discussions, but I think we have to look at the language of the DMRB, which is assertive, and the language of the MFS, which is discursive. The dear old DMRB, it is there, and until someone gets rid of it, it will continue to be there. And all the bad examples that we say, oh, what a pity, that's because of the DMRB, which is out of date. When I say out of date, it's 50 years, it's half a century out of date, when the world is a very, very different place. But I can speak on this, but I won't. One of the things it does is prevents urbanism being produced. If you want a tight urban design like a city centre, the DMRB stops you doing it. You have to have an exception, and that takes a lot of trouble. The DMRB hasn't heard of things like inclusiveness. It hasn't heard about things like place or context or pedestrian networks. So when all the designs are applicable to the Gobi Desert, but not necessarily to ordinary places, and we have splitter islands, which are terrible for pedestrians, excellent for drivers. It's still there, and to this day, they're still being built. Hundreds and hundreds of them. And if you want to change it and make it slightly more pedestrian friendly, you have to have a big argument, and you have to say, I will overturn the DMRB because the DMRB doesn't allow you to make any changes. It's rather like the tablets, the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt do this, and I shall produce thine sight lines. And if you want to have a nice pedestrian crossing, rather not a crossing, a sort of extend a pedestrian across a T-junction, as has been done in Poynton and in South London, you can't do it according to the DMRB without a huge amount of trouble. So we have to think. And then we have the manual for streets. The manual for streets is certainly up to date, and it will be even more up to date. And absolutely, and Glenn Higgs will produce a fantastic job. But it is seen by many engineers as urban designers talking to each other. It is discursive. It assumes a certain amount of pre-knowledge. Also, we have to think where it comes in to the rules. The highways are governed according to highway rules, the legislation, under that secondary legislation, which are the regulations. Then there are guidance and advice and special interest advice. 20 or 30 different interest groups, including people like Living Streets and all the other 20s, Plenty and all those people, very excellent people, have their own interest advice. And the poor old highways engineer has to decide. He's the one, not particularly well paid, that has to decide what is good and what is bad. And the MFS has an opportunity of being responsible and helping highway engineers coordinate. Perhaps its coordination role is a very important role. And I think I'd just like to say 2 points that should help engineers know more about urban designers. I wonder how many engineers there are this evening talking to us, but it should also help urban designers know more about engineering. So my question is this: what previous knowledge should a user of the manual for streets have? And if you want to ask me what I think, I'd be delighted to tell you, but that's the end of the talk. Thank you very much indeed for your kind attention.
Colin, do you want to give us 1 minute of your opinion, since you kind of like dangled it in front of us? We want to hear it now.
Okay, can you hear me? Just say yes.
Yes,
okay. Well, I think the MFS should have teeth. It should replace everything in the DMRB except motorways and segregated roads. It should be mandatory. And then it's a huge opportunity to bring movement and place together. I think it should explain principles supported by evidence in a language which is straightforward and capable of being understood by the elected representatives of the people, councillors. In other words, councillors should understand what they're saying, what the policies are, and the underlying evidence that support it. That's it.
So now we learn, now it's Kenny Aitken, and he will tell us a little bit about Scotland and how it works there.
Evening, everyone. I'm Kenny Aitken, work for Transport Scotland, and I'm also the chair of the Roads Development Group in Scotland for Scots, which is the Society of Chief Officers of Transportation in Scotland. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give a quick summary of how differently this has evolved in Scotland. Next, please. I've been involved in this for a long while now. I wrote the Roads Development Guide in 1994 for Strathclyde region. And this was subsequently copied by all the roads authorities in Scotland and effectively became the national guide. Next, please. Designing Streets was published in 2010 by the Scottish Government Planning Department as government policy, but it didn't include enough detail to allow implementation. It appears to follow many of the principles in Manual for Streets, but it was published before Manual for Streets 2. Next, please. So, to facilitate the implementation of designing streets, we decided to revise the old SRC guidelines, and a working party was set up by Scots with 27 of the 32 roads authorities within Scotland becoming involved, myself from Transport Scotland and also Scottish Government planners. Next, please. The document itself was split into 3 bits. I'm not going to be able to go through any of them in any great detail. Next, please. But in the introduction, we took the likes of this as an example from Designing Streets, which I'm sure you'll kind of recognise as being similar to Manual for Streets. Next, please. And then through some research, next, please, we then created a more usable place movement diagram with explanations on how to use it. So the whole principle of the document is to make it more easily usable, or Designing Streets more easily usable. Next, please. The principles section of the document, the second one, covers all the necessary consents, what's required for each element of the street to ensure that it can be adopted by the Roads Authority, and then the process to be followed with the appropriate forms. So we use standard forms in Scotland so that everybody's using the same forms. Next, please. And then in the details section, we go into much more information on the roads design, including the parking, all the required parameters, details, and along with all the construction details. Next, please. So when we actually launched the document in May 2014, we wanted to make sure that it was widely adopted and everyone understood the principles behind it. So we set up 3 full-day seminars across Scotland with well over 100 people attending each one. Then we set up 2 workshops, which we held centrally in Stirling in the centre of Scotland. Again, this was just to those that were more interested in actually using it so that they could come and practice and learn how to use the document in much more detail. We prepared guidance notes, and along with Scottish Government planners, we set up a web-based toolbox, again, to help users understand the processes involved. Next, please. This is just an example of the sort of thing that was in the toolbox and the various things that were covered in it. I've not got time to go into any of the detail in that. Next, please. So, it's a living document in the Roads Development Guide. It's not going to be, it's not published and left to rot on the shelf, so to speak. And we do updates and improvements on a regular basis. And I'll now talk about that in a bit more detail. Next, please. So the document is web-based with free access to all on the Roads Improvement website. It can be downloaded as a complete document. Next, please. You can see here that there's a massive difference in Scotland in land types, types of roads, population densities, and so on. And so we accepted that it wouldn't be one size that would fit all. So we knew that each road authority wouldn't be keen on just adopting absolutely everything in it. So we allowed each road authority to introduce variations. And these are linked within the document, and they can be accessed by clicking on the appropriate council within that map, and then that opens up a separate page, and that's got the variations on it for each appropriate local authority. Next, please. Because it's kind of a lot of it is web-based on that system, we had a bit of just how to use it. Just the centre bit there, if you can see, there's a chain link on it. So often we decided that rather than publish or print a lot of additional information, we would just provide a link to the actual document. So it gives you a brief summary of what the document does and what you need it for. And then you'd click on that link and it would take you directly to that document. In the bottom left there, that's on the bottom of every even numbered page. And again, that gives you the opportunity to go to the local variations. you can go back to the home page and you can zoom in or zoom out just to look at any of the drawings on it in any more detail. And on the right hand at the bottom there, on all the odd number pages, we have just to go back or forward. We can print the document, so you can go into it and print any part of it or all of it, whatever you want to do. And you got to remember, of course, that the only one that is continuously live and updated is the one that is on the website. And the final one there is to provide, if you click on that, it opens an email which is sent to me as the chair of the group, and that is for any comments or any amendments, anything, errors that you spot or anything like that that you want to consider further. Next slide, please. So finally, we have a review group. We meet every 6 months. And what we do is we look at the comments, amendments, everything that we get sent to us. And if there's anything that we need to consider, we will change the document to suit that. As I said, there's the local amendments. People, all the authorities send us these. And if they update them, and as we, every now and again, we just kind of go through the local amendments and see whether or not there is a trend where something's becoming more common. And then we'll go to the other authorities and say to them, right, could you accept this? And if we can, then it makes it more consistency across the whole document. And we take out some of the amendments if that's possible. Not always possible, of course. And then finally, we're looking at just general improvements or alterations. So if any new documents are published or something's changed, we can change the links. We can add some new documents into it for reference purposes. One of the things that we are looking at as a general improvement just now is, rather than have it as a whole document to download, we're looking now at setting up more text on the actual website, and then links to separate chapters to make it a wee bit more user-friendly. And that's me finished. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Kenny. And I think it's a really good idea actually to have a web-based document that is live, can be updated, because sometimes it is very simple barriers that stop people from using it. So it needs to be as practical and as up-to-date as it should be, isn't it? So that's really good. Thank you for sharing that. Next speaker is Brenda Puech. Sorry, I'm probably kind of totally not pronouncing your name correctly. And we will hear about inclusive design. So Brenda, over to you.
Okay. Great. Okay. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about inclusivity and street design. So I want to talk about inclusivity in a wider context. So first of all, the priority is to ensure that the details of street design are suitable for all users, all abilities, all ages. Secondly, widening the definition of inclusivity to make sure that communities are involved in a more significant way in street design, in micro street design and use, and I'll talk about that later. And thirdly, most streets are existing. Manual for Streets currently focuses on new streets and to some extent on redevelopment of existing streets. But because most streets are existing, I think there should be a greater emphasis and a dedicated section on rectifying and improving existing streets. So those are the three main aspects of inclusivity. Manual for Streets currently has many good aspects. And I think that those obviously need to be kept and built on. So it talks about, it has a priority on creating an inclusive environment. It has a very strong section on the street as a place with its place function, encouraging social activity. It talks about, when it talks about improving existing streets, it talks about carrying out audits. It references best practice inclusive design guidance and the DDA, which is now the Equality Act. However, we want to improve and build on these good principles and approaches as thinking has progressed. For example, Manual for Streets talks about dropped curbs to create step-free routes. We want that actually to be a level crossing, because dropped curbs create ponding and they can be quite difficult for many disabled people to negotiate the drop. So level is better. Side road crossings, Manual for Streets says tight corner radii, which is good. Yes, we like that, but we also want them again raised to footway level. And we want zebra markings included when that's allowed in the future. Manual for Street talks about how to mitigate vehicular crossovers for driveways. We don't want mitigation. We want the vehicular driveway crossovers actually progressively removed. For example, Manual for Street says seating should be every 100 meters. If car parking can be every 6 meters, I think we can have parking for people every 50 meters. That should be appropriate. Also, having motor-centric street furniture placed on footways, these should be progressively removed and placed on build-outs if necessary. So that's just to talk about how to make low-traffic neighborhoods more inclusive, because there's been a lot of comment on them, particularly from disabled people. So just to say again, this is learning from the new Pave the Way document that Transport for All brought out. So it's not enough just to reduce motor traffic volumes and speeds. Existing streetscape that has now been left clear of huge motor traffic and volumes, decades of neglect and motor-centric design has fashioned existing streetscape and has made it virtually impossible to use for active travel by many disabled people. And the sort of things, we all know what those are: narrow footways, motor-centric street furniture further obstructing them, steep crossfalls, so many cobbled crossovers, hugely difficult side road crossings, poor maintenance, poor surfacing, and often this is due to pavement parking that has not been addressed. So we need robust processes on how to rectify existing streets alongside the implementation of low traffic neighborhoods. There are some new inclusive access issues that we have to deal with. One is electric vehicle charging points, which are all over the footway now. So it's just exacerbating the footway situation. And the other aggravating factor is when lampposts are used for charging and you have hanging cables from lampposts going across the street. This is a hazard for everyone, particularly for visually impaired people. We should be integrating navigation apps for visually impaired people within every street or every streetscape. Instead of talking about car clubs, we should be talking about cargo bike clubs, family bike clubs, and cycle hire and adapted cycle hire hubs. We've got to manage electric scooters, which are a new entry on the street. And a recent gripe is the huge bins that are now being used for collection. I think this is more a management issue than a street design issue, but management is also a key part of streetscape. So a few issues I think that need a moderate rethink in Manual for Streets. One is the description of the place function of a street. So Manual for Street identifies these as they're outside schools, big centers of towns, or local centers, shopping streets, but it ignores residential streets as having a place function. So I think we explicitly need to talk about the place function of residential streets. The entire residential streets should have a place function, and only streets with bus services should have a movement function. Otherwise, the primary function of residential street should be for play, for social interaction, rest, and the movement of vehicles should very much be a secondary function. Right. So another thing in Manual for Streets, it has about 7 or 8 pages on facilitating on-street car parking. So it says, Manual for Streets says, parking is a key function of most streets in residential areas. And then it goes on to say, streets provide a very good car park, and on-street car parking is good practice. So we want to, I think that needs to be seriously challenged in the new Manual for Streets, because the future of travel should not include facilitating private car storage and use on the streets. So on-street car parking should be progressively reduced and removed and only retained primarily for use by disabled people who have no other way of getting around. The only parking bays that should be prioritized should be for service and delivery vehicles, and curbside space should therefore be flexibly designated for use by communities and residents. Other issues that need a radical rethink are who are the stakeholders for streets. So Manual for Streets identifies professionals and organizations as key stakeholders, but we'd like to see communities, residents as key stakeholders, facilitating community involvement and ownership of streets, of parts of streets, micro parts of streets. And we want more people to be allowed to be involved in street management and micro design, things like parklets. So therefore, the question is, can software management issues be involved in Manual for Streets? Can it talk about street management alongside street design? So can it facilitate and can it address flexible use, for example, of curbside space? The sort of things I'm talking about that would involve the community would be community planting in the public realm, as they have in Paris with the greening permit. It's a wonderful way for people to get involved and feel a sense of ownership in the public realm. If they can plant around tree pits and neglected bits of, or just pieces of public realm that no one is using. Also, to allow temporary use of curbside space for meetings, social gatherings, social entrepreneurship. So in a sense, to have the equivalent of a car parking visitor permit, to have a visitor people parking permit. So could that be facilitated? And progressing from that to have more permanent use of curbside space for communities, such as facilitating parklets and building of parklets by communities to create a community focus and to create, again, to create a sense of ownership in the street and to give people a stake in their street so that there's far more social interaction and far more building of communities through streetscape rather than only having professionals involved in street design. So I think I've spoken enough. Thank you all for listening. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Brenda, for giving us a really comprehensive overview and drawing our attention to, well, the involvement of communities and the residents who live in those streets, and also management and maintenance, certainly very, very important issues that need to be addressed. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
We now conclude the series of speakers with 2 more kind of reflections from Phil Jones and Tim Pharoah. So Phil, do you want to start first?
Thank you very much, Katja. Yeah, so I'll be fairly quick. So yeah, reflections. It's a bit of a looking back and a looking forward, really, and you know, not much. It's terrible, really, that so little has changed. So this is where we were in the mid-2000s with the housing audits and all of the assessments that were being done of housing quality at that time, and based on the Building for Life 20 questions as they stood at that point. And the ones that came out worst were integration with existing roads, paths and development, car parking situated not to detract from the street scene, picking up Brenda's point, And does the layout promote use of the street by those not in cars? And those were the worst performing aspects of development at the beginning of the century. I was lucky enough to be involved in writing this report, which with a previous better streets, better places. And it was then looking at the difficult question. We had PPG3 at the time, we had DB32, and we had places, streets and movement, which was a kind of gloss on DB32. But it was saying, you know, why were the new highways meeting the then planning policy not being adopted? And we concluded there are problems, they're serious and widespread. Much of the existing policy and legal and technical framework is not geared to the delivery of better quality streets. And recommendations included, but not limited to, and I'll say a bit more about at the end, a new document. And actually we called it Manual for Streets, a reference for design and adoption. I'd forgotten that. I looked back today and we included the word adoption as a subtitle, but that was dropped. Maybe that should have been kept. And so, I mean, I know you all know it pretty well, but I just thought I'd, you know, put this slide up because it was very lofty. It had some really lofty aims: transformation in quality, fundamental culture change were the things that it was talking about, and putting the needs of communities first, and inclusive design, connectivity, distinctive. So the tension between distinctiveness and standards was something that we gave a lot of thought to. But the issues that mostly concern local authority highway adoption offices are cost of maintenance and highway safety. And of course, those were in the list as well. So they weren't being abandoned. They were just being added to by these other things. And where are we now? Well, best part of 20 years on, another housing design audit was done, 142 developments, small improvements from 2007, but still the design is overwhelmingly poor, and the least successful design elements, overly engineered highways infrastructure. Nothing has changed significantly in new residential development in that time, despite the publication and all the best efforts that we put into Manual for Streets and Manual for Streets 2. You know, the quality of mass housing has not improved. And you know, I spent a lot of time thinking, why is that? Why is that? And I know Tim's going to speak after me, but I remember him saying this. He may well deny it, but I remember him saying this. We were at pains to, we thought that the future lay in reducing the frequency of numbers in the guidance. We thought that engineers were constrained by the numbers, and we thought that if only we had more information, more kind of appeal to people to think from first principles, then we would set engineers free to design more creatively and work collaboratively with urban designers and create great places that may not have met standards, but would be great because we understood them from first principles. And of course that didn't work. And a few years, about 10 years later, I was in a meeting. I got very cross when a highways DC officer said to me, "We can't work to Manual for Streets. It's too fluffy." And I got all cross with her, and then realised actually she was right. You know, if she can't work to it, then it's not performing its function. So we need to do something about that. And I think, you know, that's one of the things. And I know Glenn is very well aware of that. It has to become clearer and say what good looks like. But how can we do that? The difficulty is, how do we do that without everywhere becoming the same, which is one of the things that we're trying to move away from, because that's what DB32 does. Yeah, engineers love it because it's very easy. You just look at the numbers, you count the dwellings, you know, and the fact that you can have carriageway width based on the number of dwellings served tells you that this is a cul-de-sac layout. It doesn't have to spell it out. You can't count the number of dwellings served by a grid of streets. You know, so that's what it is, and it works very nicely. And it's really easy. It makes your job very easy, and it gives you a defence if things go wrong, because you say, well, this is what the book told me to do. So yeah, we need a new MFS. Yes, please. But in the meantime, I just thought I'd share. This is something that we're working on. I know Amy Burbidge of Homes England was originally going to be part of this, and Amy's our client for this. So we hope that the new Manual for Streets will get kind of help us. But in the meantime, we've been producing this document, which will be launched pretty soon, a companion guide to building for a healthy life that we've just tried to, and very much a companion to Manual for Streets as well, to try to show in a bit more detail what good looks like. And so it's full of pictures. and this is part one. We hope to be commissioned to do part two shortly, which will include some standard details of just the things that regularly go wrong in new housing. And again, we're talking to Glenn about that, and we hope that if this proves to be a success, it will be an easy fit and can be adopted and taken into the new manual for streets. So work is going on, and that's something that we're trying to do as our little contribution to this process. But will it be enough? I was asked, and I contributed some thoughts to the Building Beautiful Commission, so another better, and I referred back to Better Streets, Better Places. And I think I said that, Manual for Streets was not the only recommendation. A lot of it was about motivation. Why should a highway authority pick up this book and implement it? Because, our bookshelves are littered with guidance that is not used. And we said this, and I think it's still true, that local highway authorities are generally motivated by the desire to reduce future risks, both in terms of public safety and by minimizing maintenance costs. They have little motivation to accept more innovative designs that are perceived to conflict with these aims. And I think that is as true today as when we wrote it, getting on for 20 years ago. And this is the words that I said to the Commission. I said the main problem I see is that the public realm function of streets is not one that highway authorities care very much about. And how do we change that? I think we have to change that. And it could be about the status of manual for streets, but I think that may be not quite enough, because designing streets in Scotland is policy. And yet, notwithstanding the guidance that's being produced, more detailed guidance, there are still complaints. And I was talking to an urban designer in Scotland the other day about the suburbanisation of new developments in the Highlands of Scotland. That's still not enough just to make it a policy document. So, and you said we had to change the motivation. We're changing the measures of success. That was the words that we used in 2003. Now, somebody put it in the chat, and I think this is quite significant. One of the things that we said back in 2003 is that DfT have to get a bit tougher with highway authorities. And the view then was, no, we don't do that. We're not a highway authority. Highway authorities are sovereign in the functions that they have. They can decide to choose the standards that they work to. It's not a function of government to tell highway authorities what to do. And when gear change came out in July of last year, that has changed the rules. That has changed that significantly. And we haven't got it yet, but Active Travel England or gear change, the policy document that launched Local Transport Note 120 on cycle infrastructure, says we will require highway authorities to work to this if schemes are to receive funding. So they're using the checkbook, if we still use checkbooks, to motivate highway authorities to adopt this new guidance. And it uses words like enforce. The standards will be enforced by Active Travel England. We will expect. This is very new language. And so the question is, will we see the same level of commitment from Department for Transport or from government or from MHCLG to use manual for streets? So how to get, it's a manual, which means it should be taken in hand. How do we get it taken in hand? Policy and process, yes. But I think we need to show very clearly what good looks like. We have to recognise that everyone's under time pressure. Engineers, like everybody else, there are many, many engineers who want to do the right thing, but they don't know what the right thing is. And we have to make it easy for them to do the right thing. So practicing engineers can understand. But we have to have some kind of carrots and sticks to make sure it is applied. And I think it's for others perhaps to decide what those carrots and sticks are. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you for that overview and the kind of, well, I guess a reflection on how we got to where we are at the moment. Tim, where are you? Do you want to go next and share your reflections?
I was asking myself, do we want to see evolutionary or revolutionary change when we see the new manual for streets? And it struck me that probably we need a bit of both. I feel that it certainly needs to shift emphasis. I'm not about to enter a defense of the fluffy, but there does seem to me to be a need to link with between national policy and the content of manual for streets. Especially if manual for streets is to be mandated if local authorities are required to use it as opposed to being allowed to get away with not using it, then the congruence with high policy goals, if you like, needs to be dealt with. In particular, I think there needs to be a shift of emphasis to deal with climate change, which should move from being a consideration to being an emergency. Now, obviously, if one is going to take on a task like that, and I wouldn't envy the task of the person to write it, but if that sort of emphasis is to be included in Manual for Streets, then I think there would have to be a shift away from other things. I would suggest a shift away from matters of appearance and aesthetics, because there is other guidance on this. In fact, huge amounts of guidance and more on the way on appearance and aesthetics. So when I look at chapter 5, which is called Quality Places, for example, well, I would suggest most of that can be ditched. So, yeah, I think we need a shift towards measures and forms of development that address the climate imperative. And I'm thinking mostly, of course, about the creation of new streets. And Brenda's dealing with the existing streets, I thought was excellent and very thought-provoking, and a lot of good stuff in there. But thinking more in terms of the creation of new areas, I think we need measures and forms of development that address the climate imperative. And this, I suppose, would be the revolutionary bit. The original Manual for Streets wasn't revolutionary in the sense that all the ideas that it contained had been discussed and bandied about for a long time, but it was revolutionary in terms of what guidance was offering. So I think Manual for Streets needs to spell out the consequences for sustainable design of development location, density, and mix of activities. Manual for Streets, para 4.4.3, rather timidly discusses density, for example, as a consideration. This should be brought centre stage and, overcome its stage fright. With low density housing, excessive parking, next to nothing local facilities, and free flow traffic roads, then good design and sustainable outcomes are impossible to achieve. And such developments should be branded unacceptable and not excused. We don't need guidance on how to do them. So that's the sort of main thrust. What about the evolutionary approach and updating? Well, I had a very long list, but I'll just fire off a few things which struck me as needing attention, where the original Manual for Streets is looking a bit long in the tooth. First of all, there are changed attitudes to speed. We're now accepting 20 miles an hour as the urban norm, when in 2007, the idea of self-enforcing 20-mile-an-hour limits was more or less laughed out of court. Now it's commonplace and people are increasingly abiding by it. Then there's dealing with technology, new technology, but things, micro-mobility vehicles, electric vehicles and charging, route guidance, which has had an enormous impact on route choice. I think we need onboard speed limiters. Never mind autonomous vehicles. Let's have vehicles behaving automatically as they should by automatically limiting the speed according to the designated speed limit. And then we could dump the hump. Humps are only there to do what technology could easily do for us now. Then there's the growing obesity in the stock of cars. Cars are getting fatter and fatter and taller, and So we've now got manual for streets, which designates or suggests 2-metre wide parking bays, but a lot of cars that are being bought today are 2.1 or more metres. Is that still appropriate? Should we cater for those larger vehicles, or should we ban their sale in the interests of climate change? Then there's shared cars. This has struggled to take off. I did a lot of research back in the 70s and 80s on the merits of shared cars, but it's never really taken off as a mainstream thing. Why not? We need to address that, and Manual for Streets, I think, needs to look at street designs which future-proof against a situation where vehicles more normally are shared ownership or shared access rather than individual ownership. And then there's bus routes. They don't get sufficient attention in the existing Manual for Streets. There's CIHT's Buses in Urban Developments, which I worked on in 2018. The main lessons involving street design should be absorbed from there. Then there's the virus and future pandemics. How about 3 metres for minimum footway to allow distancing? Guard railing, oh my goodness, 3 pages are devoted to guardrails in Manual for Streets. Take it out. Guardrails are simply an admission of design failure. And finally, pavement parking. Just stop it. Full stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. I mean, Robert has actually just drawn our attention to an anniversary that is happening this year. It is 30 years since you wrote the Devon County Council traffic calming guidelines. So you are a true expert. Happy anniversary for that one. So with Tim, we have now concluded, with our speakers. I mean, I think it was 11 excellent presentations. Really kind of succinct to the point and full of information that we all need to digest. I think I also want to draw your attention to some other information that you can find on our website, like a recent article on street design standards by Robert, and also a briefing sheet that was jointly developed by the UDG and the ICE. And I also want to kind of just say that everybody, we will kind of write up the chat and save it and put something back out in terms of a summary of that amazing discussion that happened in the chat. So many views, so many expert voices and discussion points, really, really helpful. And I assume that the WSP team has probably been listening and taking notes, but we will share these notes anyway.